Minerva Ashworth's silk gloves trembled as she tore open the letter that would seal her fate. The morning sun, streaming through the parlor windows of the grand Ashworth estate, seemed to mock her as she read her father's ultimatum. Penned in his harsh, unforgiving script, "You will marry Josiah Fletcher, our stable hand, within the fortnight, or you will be cast out without a penny to your name." The crystal vase beside her crashed to the floor as her hands went limp. 3 weeks ago, she had been the belle of Millbrook Valley, courted by every eligible gentleman from here to Denver. 3 weeks ago, before that fateful evening when young Dr. Harrison Pemberton had been caught leaving her bedroom window at midnight, the scandal had spread through their small Colorado mountain town like wildfire through dry timber. Never mind that Harrison had been tending to her sick lady's maid in secret. The appearance of impropriety was enough to destroy her reputation completely. Her father, Cornelius Ashworth, had built his mining fortune on respectability and social standing. His daughter's disgrace threatened everything he held dear. The other wealthy families had already begun turning their backs, and the marriage proposals had ceased entirely. Minerva. Her father's voice boomed through the house as his heavy boots echoed down the marble hallway. She quickly tucked the letter into her bodice as he burst through the parlor doors, his weathered face red with fury. "I trust you've read my terms," he said, his steel-gray eyes boring into hers. "That boy Fletcher may be nothing more than a servant, but he's honest work and keeps his mouth shut. Better you marry beneath your station than live as a spinster, bearing the shame of your wanton behavior." Minerva lifted her chin defiantly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I did nothing wrong, Papa. Dr. Pemberton was— I don't care what that young fool was doing." Cornelius slammed his fist against the mahogany table. "The damage is done. The whole territory knows the Ashworth name has been sullied. This marriage will at least give you a roof over your head and spare me the humiliation of having an unmarried daughter living under my roof like some kept woman." Through the window, Minerva could see Josiah Fletcher leading her father's prized stallion to the watering trough. Even from this distance, she could make out his tall, lean frame and the way his dark hair caught the morning light. She had barely spoken 3 words to the man in all the years he'd worked their land. "He's agreed to this madness?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her father's cruel smile sent ice through her veins. "For the sum I'm paying him and the small cabin I'm deeding him on the south pasture, he'd marry the devil himself. We'll be wed Saturday morning, and by Saturday night, you'll be out of my house for good." As the door slammed behind him, Minerva sank into the velvet chair, her world crashing down around her. In 6 days, she would go from being the pampered daughter of the richest man in 3 counties to the wife of a stable hand, who saw her as nothing more than a profitable transaction. She pressed her face into her hands and wept for the life that was ending and the uncertain future that awaited her in the arms of a stranger. The morning of her wedding dawned gray and cheerless, as if the very heavens mourned Minerva's fate. She stood before her vanity mirror in a simple, cream-colored dress her father had refused to allow her the family wedding gown, declaring she had forfeited that right along with her honor. Her lady's maid, Prudence, worked silently to pin up her auburn hair. The older woman's eyes were redrimmed from crying, but she dared not speak against Master Ashworth's decree. "There now, Miss Minerva," Prudence whispered, placing a small wildflower behind her ear. "You look lovely even if this isn't the wedding we dreamed of." A sharp rap at the door interrupted them. "Time to go," came her father's gruff voice, "the preacher's waiting." The ceremony took place in the small wooden church at the edge of town, with only a handful of witnesses present. Minerva's hands shook as she walked down the short aisle, catching sight of Josiah Fletcher standing awkwardly at the altar in his one good suit. He was younger than she'd realized, perhaps only 25 to her 22 years. His face was deeply tanned from years of outdoor work, and his hands bore the calluses of honest labor. When she reached his side, he offered her a small, uncertain smile that didn't reach his dark brown eyes. Reverend Matthews rushed through the ceremony with unseemly haste, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual circumstances. When it came time for the vows, Josiah's voice was barely audible as he promised to love and cherish her. Minerva's own words came out in a strangled whisper. "You may kiss the bride," the Reverend announced with obvious relief. Josiah leaned toward her hesitantly, pressing his lips briefly and chastely against hers. His kiss was gentle, nothing like the brutal claiming she had feared. But it still felt like the final nail in the coffin of her old life. After the ceremony, her father handed Josiah an envelope thick with bills and the deed to the small cabin. "She's your responsibility now," he said coldly, not even looking at his daughter. "Don't expect any further assistance from me." The wagon ride to their new home was conducted in uncomfortable silence. Minerva sat as far from her new husband as possible, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The cabin, when it came into view, was smaller than her former dressing room, a simple log structure with a stone chimney and a small front porch. Josiah helped her down from the wagon with surprising gentleness. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said quietly, his first words to her since their vows. "I'll try to make the best of it I can." Inside, the cabin was clean, but sparse. A bed dominated one corner, causing Minerva's cheeks to flame with embarrassment. A small kitchen area occupied another corner, and a rough wooden table and 2 chairs comprised the rest of the furniture. "I'll sleep on the floor," Josiah said quickly, following her gaze to the bed, until you're more comfortable. With the arrangement, his unexpected consideration brought tears to her eyes. She had steeled herself for a brute who would claim his marital rights immediately, not this quiet, thoughtful man who seemed as uncertain as she was. As night fell, and they shared a simple supper of bread and stew, Minerva found herself stealing glances at her husband. He ate carefully, as if unused to dining with a lady, and kept his eyes downcast. When she accidentally knocked over her water glass, he leaped up to clean it without a word of reproach. Perhaps this wouldn't be the nightmare she had imagined. 3 days into their marriage, Minerva discovered that her husband was not the simple, stable hand she had assumed him to be. She woke to find him sitting at the kitchen table, reading a leather-bound book by candlelight in the pre-dawn darkness.
Oh.
"You read?" she asked, startled. In her world, servants rarely possessed such skills. Josiah looked up, his cheeks coloring slightly. "My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She insisted I learn." He closed the book, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. She noted with surprise. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "I've always been an early riser." Over the following days, she began to see glimpses of the man beneath the servant's facade. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were carefully chosen and intelligent. He cooked simple but nourishing meals, mended her torn dress with surprising skill, and never once raised his voice or showed impatience with her obvious helplessness at domestic tasks. Most surprising of all, he had kept his word about sleeping arrangements. Each night, he made a bed for himself on the floor near the fireplace, leaving her the privacy of the bedroom. She found herself lying awake, listening to his quiet breathing and wondering about this strange, gentle man fate had bound her to. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, she finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been plaguing her. "Why did you agree to marry me? Surely you could have found a wife who came to you willingly." Josiah was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I've loved you from afar for 3 years," he said, not looking at her. "Every morning when I brought your father's horse around, I would catch glimpses of you in the garden or at your window. You were like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and untouchable." Minerva's breath caught in her throat. "You ... loved me." "I know it was presumptuous," he continued, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "A man like me had no right to even think such thoughts about a lady like you. And your father made his offer. I couldn't refuse the chance to have you as my wife, even knowing you could never return such feelings." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open inside her chest. Here was a man who had married her not for money or convenience, but for love, something she had never experienced from any of her previous suitors. "Josiah," she said softly, and he looked up at her with such hope and fear in his eyes that her heart ached. "May I?" He nodded wordlessly, and she moved from her chair to the small wooden bench beside him. Time since their wedding, she really looked at him, the strong line of his jaw, the kindness in his dark eyes, the way his hands shook slightly as she drew closer. "I don't know if I can love you yet," she said honestly, "but I would like to try to know you, the real you." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I would like that very much." That night, for the first time, she lay in the bed, knowing that the man sleeping on the floor below loved her with a pure, selfless devotion she had never dreamed possible. The knowledge both terrified and thrilled her, opening a door in her heart she hadn't known existed. Perhaps her punishment was becoming something else entirely. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant golds and scarlets, Minerva found herself looking forward to each day with an anticipation she hadn't felt since childhood. Josiah was unlike any man she had ever known, patient where others had been demanding, thoughtful where others had been selfish. He began teaching her practical skills with infinite gentleness when she burned their breakfast for the third morning. In a row, he simply smiled and showed her how to regulate the heat of the fire. When she struggled with mending, he guided her hands with his own, his touch sending unexpected warmth through her fingers. "You're a fine teacher," she told him one afternoon as they worked together in the small garden behind their cabin. She had successfully harvested their late vegetables without destroying half the plants, a vast improvement from her first attempts. "You're a willing student," he replied, his eyes crinkling with amusement, though I never expected to see Minerva Ashworth with dirt under her fingernails. The use of her old name made her pause. "I'm Minerva Fletcher now," she said quietly, and something in her tone made him stop his work and look at her intently. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "The name change, I mean. Everything that brought you here." She considered his question seriously, something she wouldn't have done even a month ago. "I regret the scandal and the pain it caused. I regret that my father cast me out in anger rather than trust in my innocence. But marrying you?" She met his eyes steadily. "I'm finding that I regret that less each day." That evening, she surprised them both by sitting beside him on his makeshift floor bed, rather than retreating to the bedroom. They had taken to reading together in the evenings. He would read aloud from books he borrowed from the town's small library while she worked on her mending. "Josiah," she said suddenly, interrupting his recitation of Keats, "why do you sleep on the floor?" His hands stilled on the pages. "'Cause you asked me to. Because I want you to feel safe and comfortable. But what if I no longer wanted you to?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. He set the book aside carefully as if it were made of spun glass. "What are you saying, Minerva?" "Saying that I trust you," she whispered. "I'm saying that this cabin has become more of a home to me than my father's mansion ever was. I'm saying that when I think of my future now, I can't imagine it without you in it." The hope that blazed in his eyes took her breath away. "Are you certain? I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for." In answer, she reached out and took his calloused hand in her soft one. "I'm certain that I want to be a true wife to you. I'm certain that whatever this feeling is that's been growing in my chest these past weeks, I want to explore it with you." Lifted their joined hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then let me court you properly, Mrs. Fletcher. Let me show you how deeply I can cherish you." The formality of his words made her laugh, a sound of pure joy that filled the small cabin. "We're already married, you foolish man. And let me show you why that's the greatest gift I've ever been given." When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like their awkward wedding kiss. This kiss was full of promise and passion, carefully held in check. Glimpse of the fire that burned beneath his gentle exterior. For the first time since her wedding day, Minerva fell asleep in her husband's arms, and the happiness that filled her dreams was sweeter than anything she had ever known. Winter's first. Snow blanketed their small cabin like a pristine wedding veil, and Minerva woke to find herself truly content for the first time in her life. Josiah's arms were wrapped around her, his steady breathing warming the back of her neck as dawn light filtered through their small window. 3 weeks had passed since. She had invited him to share their marriage bed, and each night had brought new revelations about both herself and the remarkable man she had married. His hands, so rough from years of labor, touched her with a reverence that made her feel like the most precious thing on earth. "Good morning, my love," his deep voice rumbled against her ear, and the endearment still sent shivers of pleasure down her spine. She turned in his arms to face him, marveling at how his dark hair fell across his forehead in the morning light. "Good morning, husband." The word that had once felt like a chain around her neck now fell from her lips like a caress. When he smiled at her, that slow, devastating smile that transformed his entire face, she felt her heart skip in the way she had once thought existed only in poetry. "I have something for you," he said, reaching toward the small table beside their bed. "Josiah, we can't afford gifts," she protested, though she couldn't help but smile at his boyish excitement. "It didn't cost anything," he assured her, pressing a small wooden object into her hands. She gasped when she saw what he had carved for her, a perfect miniature rose, every petal detailed with exquisite care. "Oh, it's beautiful. When did you make this? In the evenings while you slept? I wanted you to have flowers even in winter." His cheeks colored slightly. "I know it's not much compared to what you're used to." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her newfound love into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she cradled the wooden rose against her heart. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she whispered truthfully, "because it came from your hands, made with love." Later that morning, as she prepared breakfast and Josiah tended to the few livestock they kept, Minerva found herself humming something she hadn't done since before the scandal. Through the window, she watched her husband splitting wood for their fire. His movements efficient and graceful, despite the heavy axe in his hands. Mrs. Abernathy, the preacher's wife, chose that moment to come calling, ostensibly to check on the newlyweds, but clearly hoping for gossip to share with the other church ladies. "My dear," the older woman said, settling her ample form into one of their chairs with obvious reluctance, "I do hope you're adjusting well to your ... circumstances." The pity in her voice might once have wounded Minerva, but now it only amused her. "I'm adjusting beautifully, Mrs. Abernathy. In fact, I've never been happier." The woman seemed taken aback by her genuine joy. "Well, that's nice. Though I'm sure it must be difficult, going from such luxury to ... this." She gestured dismissively at their humble surroundings. "You know what I've learned?" Minerva said, settling across from her visitor with perfect composure. "Luxury means nothing if you're lonely. I had silk dresses and crystal glasses, but I never had what I have now." "What's that, dear?" "Love," Minerva said simply. "Real, honest love that asks for nothing, but gives everything." At that moment, Josiah appeared in the doorway, his shirt damp with sweat and his eyes immediately seeking out his wife. The smile that passed between them was so intimate and full of promise that Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Fletcher," she said stiffly. "Ma'am." He nodded politely, but moved directly to Minerva, pressing a brief kiss to the top of her head before reaching for a towel. The casual affection of the gesture spoke volumes about their relationship. After Mrs. Abernathy left, clearly disappointed by the lack of drama, Minerva found herself pulled into her husband's arms. Despite his protests about being sweaty from work, "I don't care," she laughed, standing on her toes to kiss him thoroughly. "I love you exactly as you are." The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken them aloud. Josiah's eyes widened with wonder and joy. "Say it again," he whispered hoarsely. "I love you, Josiah Fletcher," she repeated, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. "I love you completely and forever." His kiss tasted of promise and forever, and Minerva knew that her father's punishment had become the greatest blessing of her life. Spring brought with it both new hope and unexpected challenges. Minerva discovered she was carrying their first child just as word reached them that her father's mining operation had struck a particularly rich vein, making him wealthier than ever. "He's been asking about you," Josiah said quietly one evening. Returning from town where he'd heard the gossip, "Folks say he might be having regrets about how things ended between you." Minerva's hand instinctively moved to her still flat belly, where their child grew. "It's too late for regrets. This is my family now. But her father's apparent change of heart troubled her more than she cared to admit. 3 days later, an elegant carriage pulled up to their small cabin, and Cornelius Ashworth stepped out, looking older than she remembered. Minerva, his voice was gruff, but held none of its former harshness. "You look well?" "I am well, Papa." She remained on their porch, not inviting him in. Josiah appeared at her side immediately, his presence both protective and supportive. "Fletcher." Her father nodded curtly at her husband, then returned his attention to her. "I've come to make you an offer. Come home, both of you. I'll build you a proper house on the property, give Fletcher a position managing the entire ranch operation. Your child shouldn't be born in a cabin." The offer was generous, shockingly so, and for a moment, Minerva felt tempted. Their child would want for nothing, would have every advantage money could provide. "Why?" she asked simply. Her father's stern facade cracked slightly. "Because I was wrong. Because you were the best thing in my life, and I threw you away in my pride and anger. Because I want to know my grandchild." Beside her, Josiah tensed, and she knew he was waiting for her answer with barely concealed dread. He would go if she asked it of him, she knew, even knowing that he would never be truly accepted in her father's world. "Papa," she said gently, "I appreciate the offer, I truly do, but this is my home now. This man is my family. Our child will be born here, surrounded by love rather than luxury. But surely you want more for your child than this." Cornelius gestured at their humble dwelling. "I want our child to grow up seeing parents who chose each other freely, who work together as equals, who value character over coin." Her voice grew stronger with conviction. "I want them to learn that happiness comes from love, not from the size of your house or the weight of your purse." Her father's face fell, but there was understanding in his eyes. "You really love him?" "With all my heart." He looked at Josiah, then really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "You make her happy?" "I try to, sir, every day." "And you'll provide for her?" "Protect her. With my life, sir." Cornelius nodded slowly, then reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "I can't change what I did to you, Minerva. But I can make sure your children have choices I denied you." He held out the envelope. "The deed to this land and the surrounding 100 acres. It's yours, free and clear." Minerva stared at the envelope in shock. "Papa, don't refuse it," he said gruffly. "Call it my apology. Call it insurance for my grandchild's future. But take it." With trembling hands, she accepted the deed. "Thank you." Her father turned to go, then paused. Perhaps I could visit sometime. To see how you're getting along." "I'd like that," she said, and meant it. After he left, Josiah pulled her into his arms. "Are you certain? He was offering you everything you grew up with?" "He was offering me everything I used to think I wanted," she corrected. "But I already have everything I actually need." She pressed her hands to her belly. "Our child will grow up knowing what real love looks like." That night, as they lay in bed planning improvements to their no-secure home, Minerva reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. Her father's punishment had taught her the difference between being desired and being truly loved, between having everything and having what mattered most. 2 years later, as Minerva watched their son Gabriel take his first wobbly steps across the expanded cabin floor, she couldn't help but smile at how perfectly her life had unfolded. The child had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. And at barely a year old, he already showed signs of the intelligence both parents possessed. "Come to Papa," Josiah encouraged, kneeling with arms outstretched as Gabriel toddled toward him, giggling with delight. Their home had grown along with their family. Using the land her father had deeded them, Josiah had built additional rooms and established a small but prosperous horse breeding operation, his gentle way. With animals and keen eye for bloodlines, had quickly earned him a reputation throughout the territory. "Mrs. Fletcher," a young woman's voice called from outside, accompanied by the sound of wagon wheels. Minerva opened the door to find Martha Whitman, the banker's daughter, standing nervously beside a loaded wagon. The girl couldn't have been more than 17, and her face bore the telltale signs of recent tears. "Martha, dear, whatever is the matter, Mrs. Fletcher? I need your help." The girl's voice broke on the words. "I found myself in a situation much like yours was 3 years ago. My parents are talking about sending me away to have the baby, but I love him, Mrs. Fletcher. I love Thomas, and he loves me, but he's just a clerk in my father's bank. Papa says he'll never allow the marriage." Minerva's heart ached for the young woman. She stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as Josiah appeared in the doorway with Gabriel in his arms. "Sit with me, Martha," Minerva said gently, guiding her to the bench on their porch. "Tell me everything." Through tears, Martha explained how she had been secretly meeting with Thomas Morrison, one of the junior clerks at her father's bank. They had planned to wait until Thomas had saved enough money to ask for her hand properly, but nature had taken its own course. "Papa is furious," Martha sobbed. "He says he'd rather see me disgraced than married to a poor clerk. But Mrs. Fletcher, you found happiness even when you were forced to marry beneath your station. Is there hope for me?" Minerva exchanged a meaningful look with Josiah, who nodded slightly. Over the past 2 years, their home had become an unofficial sanctuary for young couples facing family opposition to their matches. Word had spread about the stable hand who had married the mining heiress and made her genuinely happy, and they had quietly helped for other couples navigate similar situations. "Martha, love isn't about social standing or bank accounts," Minerva said firmly. "It's about finding someone who values your heart over your inheritance, who makes you laugh when you want to cry, who stands beside you when the world seems determined to tear you apart. But how can I convince Papa?" "You probably can't," Minerva said honestly. "But you can show him that real love creates its own security. Look at Josiah and me. We started with nothing but each other, and we've built something strong and lasting over the following weeks." Minerva and Josiah quietly helped Martha and Thomas plan their elopement. They provided a safe meeting place, helped Thomas find better employment with a rancher 2 counties over, and even hosted the simple ceremony in their own parlor. "I can't thank you enough," Martha whispered as she prepared to leave with her new husband. "You've shown me that happiness is possible, even when your family abandons you." "Family isn't just about blood," Minerva replied, kissing the girl's cheek. "Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones you choose." That evening, as they tucked Gabriel into his crib, Josiah pulled his wife into his arms. "Do you ever regret becoming the refuge for star-crossed lovers?" Minerva laughed softly. "Never. We know what it's like to find love in the most unlikely circumstances. If we can help others find what we have, isn't that a wonderful legacy to leave?" "What we have is pretty wonderful," he agreed, spinning her around until she was breathless with laughter. As they settled into bed together, Minerva reflected on how her father's attempt to punish her had actually set her free. Free from the constraints of society's expectations. Free to love without calculation. Free to build a life based on genuine affection rather than social obligation. Her punishment had become her paradise, and she wouldn't change a single moment. Of the journey that had brought her here, 5 years after their wedding, Minerva stood in the same church where she had reluctantly married Josiah Fletcher, but this time she was there by choice. Watching with pride as he delivered the dedication speech for the new community center they had helped fund, their horse breeding business had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. And with success had come the opportunity to give back to the community that had slowly embraced them. Gabriel, now a sturdy 4-year-old, sat quietly in her lap while their infant daughter Rose slept peacefully in her arms. "When my wife and I were first married," Josiah was saying to the assembled crowd, "we thought we had lost everything that mattered. Instead, we discovered that love can build something far stronger than money ever could." In the front pew, Minerva caught sight of her father, who would become a regular visitor to their home and a devoted grandfather to their children. Beside him sat Martha and Thomas Morrison with their twin boys, living proof that love could indeed triumph over social expectations. "This community center stands as a testament to what we can accomplish when we support each other through difficult times," Josiah continued. "My wife often says that our greatest failures can become our greatest victories if we have the courage to learn from them." After the ceremony, as the townsfolk mingled and admired the new building, Mayor Henderson approached Minerva with a proposal that took her breath away. "Mrs. Fletcher, the town council has been discussing a position that we think you'd be perfect for," he said, his usual pompous manner replaced by genuine respect. "We'd like you to serve as our official marriage counselor and family advocate. Too many young couples are being torn apart by family pressure and social expectations. You and your husband have shown that love can overcome any obstacle." Minerva looked across the room to where Josiah was deep in conversation with several ranchers interested in his horses. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled, that same devastating smile that had won her heart completely. "I'd be honored," she replied, already imagining the good they could do together. That evening, as they walked home through the meadow behind their property, their children playing happily around them, Minerva marveled at the fullness of her life. "You remember our first conversation as husband and wife?" she asked Josiah, slipping her hand into his. "You mean when you asked me why I agreed to marry you, and I told you I'd loved you from afar for 3 years? He chuckled. "How could I forget? I was terrified you'd laugh at me. I should have known then that any man who could love so selflessly would make me happier than I'd ever dreamed possible." He stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, careful not to wake little Rose. "I should have known that any woman brave enough to make the best of an impossible situation would teach me what it really means to be alive." As they kissed under the starlight, surrounded by their children and the life they had built together, Minerva thought about the letter that had started it all, her father's harsh ultimatum that had seemed like the end of her world. Instead, it had been the beginning of everything that truly mattered. Her punishment had taught her the difference between wanting to be loved and actually being loved, between seeking security and finding true partnership, between living according to others' expectations and following her own heart. "I love you, Josiah Fletcher," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you, Minerva Fletcher, ever and always." Their love story had begun with shame and scandal, but it had blossomed into something pure and lasting, a testament to the truth that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually the best things in disguise. 10 years had passed since Cornelius Ashworth's ultimatum had changed his daughter's life forever. And as Minerva stood in the garden of their expanded home, watching Josiah teach their 3 children how to care for the horses, she couldn't help but smile at the beautiful chaos of their life together. Gabriel, now 14, had inherited his father's gentle way with animals and his mother's sharp intellect. Their daughter Rose, a spirited 10-year-old with auburn curls, possessed her father's patient nature and her mother's determination. Little Samuel, barely 3 years old, toddled after his siblings with the fearless enthusiasm that came from growing up surrounded by unconditional love. "Mama!" Rose called out, running toward her with a handful of wildflowers. "Papa said we can name the new foal together." "Did he now?" Minerva knelt to receive her daughter's enthusiastic hug. "And what name have you chosen?" "Hope," Rose announced proudly, "because Papa says hope is what brought you two together." From across the paddock, Josiah caught her eye and winked. Even after all these years, that simple gesture could still make her heart flutter like a schoolgirl's. Their marriage had become the stuff of local legend. The mining heiress and the stable hand who had built an empire of love from the ashes of scandal. Young couples came from 3 territories away to seek their counsel, and their home had become synonymous with second chances and happy endings. "Mrs. Fletcher," familiar voice called from the front of the house. Minerva looked up to see Dr. Harrison Pemberton approaching, his medical bag in hand and his wife Catherine beside him. The doctor whose midnight house call had inadvertently caused her disgrace had become one of their dearest friends, and his wife was Minerva's closest confidant. "Harrison, Catherine, how wonderful to see you." Minerva greeted them warmly. "We bring news," Catherine announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "The territorial governor has approved your proposal for the family assistance program. You'll be able to help even more couples navigate family opposition to their marriages." Minerva clasped her hands together in delight. For months, she and Josiah had been working to establish a formal program to help young people whose families opposed their choice of spouse, a cause that had grown directly from their own experience. "There's something else," Harrison added with a grin. "The governor wants to personally thank the couple whose love story inspired the legislation. You're both invited to the territorial capital for the signing ceremony." That evening, as they celebrated the good news with a special dinner, Cornelius Ashworth arrived unexpectedly, carrying an enormous wrapped package. "Grandpapa," the children chorused, rushing to greet him. Over the years, Minerva's father had transformed from the harsh, prideful man who had cast her out to a devoted grandfather who spoiled his.